Bernstein, the floor is yours.
Hello, it's November 2nd, somehow or other. This is Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. And let's proceed without further delay.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. So our typical Tinderbox meetup format is we go around the room and new people introduce themselves. We talk about why and what we want to be learning about from this tool and the general element of tools for thought. And then we explore questions, comments that people have about their tools and what they're going about solving. And then if we have a theme, we jump into the theme. It just so happens that this week we actually do have a theme, JSON. So Mark is going to walk us through the how to do JSON parsing as opposed to the Friday the 13th JSON joke that we had last week for Halloween, which I thought was funny. And then also I wanted to give an announcement. I kicked off the first cohort of a 6-week Tinderbox 101 course yesterday. That will go for the next 5 more weeks. Paul, you were part of that class. Thank you for joining and being part of that. And we will report back after 6 weeks on what we learned and what we did and how it went. But I think it's going to be progressing pretty well. I'm excited about it. Anybody that wants to hear about it or be involved, please ping me later and we can talk about it. Looking around the room, I do see, I don't know Kimmy. Kimmy, if you want to introduce yourself to the community, that would be great. That's a name I don't recognize. And I've seen Gavin before, but it's been a while. If anybody else, before we jump into our theme, does anybody have any Tinderbox questions, comments, immediate problems they're trying to solve? Bill, I haven't seen you in a long time either. Hope you're doing well. Okay, if not, let's just jump in. Mr. Bernstein, you want to kick us off and explore JSON with us or for us?
There we go. So, and chat, there we go. Hooray. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't get the green highlight I'm expecting. So do you see the JSON window?
Yes, we see your screen. We see your screen.
Okay, good. So, okay, there's been some discussion of JSON headaches on the forum and especially backstage, and it's probably time to revisit this subject. Okay. For some reason, I'm getting strange notifications. Let me know if my audio drops out. So, JSON, otherwise known as JavaScript object notation, though no one calls it that, and I had to look it up to see what it means, is a data interchange format. It's a way to get data from one program to another program. And its virtue is that while it's really meant for one program to talk to another program, people can read it, which is not true of lots of formats. I quite recommend this talk. It's a video from the discoverer of JSON. He insists he didn't invent it, he discovered it. It was already in the wild. Douglas Crockford. On how JSON came to be. It's very much a talk about programming, but unusually for talks about programming, it's accessible to people who don't have a whole lot of taste for programming. By the way, the things I'm discussing here require Tinderbox 10.02. Tinderbox 10.02 is available now. So if you have an older version of Tinderbox, not everything is going to work. So where do you find?
Hey, Mark, before we move on, I want to interject. Before you move on to, I wanted to interject one thing. I'm particularly excited about this conversation because there's another JSON format, and I'll put it in the chat, called JSON-LD, standing for linked data. And JSON LD is really becoming the backbone for self-sovereign identity and secure authentic data exchange for next generation identity and personal data management. So this is a
Okay.
fundamental data exchange protocol for us to be exploring with.
Will it have some kind of encryption or like security feature?
Yeah, it does. Well, the JSON LD in itself does not, but you can wrap around the encryption and capabilities around it to make it happen. That's why it's so effective for the SSI world.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. So, um, JSON is really easy to generate from almost anything, and especially if you happen to be working in JavaScript, JSON is trivial to generate. So programs that are written in JavaScript tend to supply JSON as an interchange format. It also was invented for sending data over the web. And so web apps tend to give you JSON. So you'll often get JSON from a web API through fetch or maybe auto fetch. You might encounter it in various other places too. I'm not going to talk about fetch today. It's not hard to use. The documentation on fetch is straightforward. Ask questions. We can maybe come back to that another day. So we start. There are a few things in JavaScript that are so easy that they require no further introduction. A number is valid JSON. A quoted string is valid JSON. And there are three keywords: true, false, and null, all lowercase. And those are valid JSON. Of course, quoted strings are delimited by straight quotes. And if you need a string with a straight quote in the inside, you use a backslash to escape it. JSON also allows you to represent lists by separating the elements with commas and enclosing the list in a straight square bracket. So 1, 3, 5 is a list. You can have lists of strings. You can have lists that mix up numbers and strings. There is no sense that you have to have a single type in a list. In fact, JSON lists look an awful lot like JavaScript, like Tinderbox lists, so much that I have a tendency to forget and to put semicolons as the delimiter instead of commas, or vice versa. Be sure you know which one you're writing in, because JSON will not accept a semicolon as a replacement for a comma, and Tinderbox will not accept a comma as a replacement for a semicolon. A JSON object is a 1 or 0 or more pairs of a keyword and a value. The keyword is always a quoted string, and the value can be any other JSON element. So you can have a keyword whose value is a list, a keyword whose value is another object. Again, the keys are always strings. The values can be anything. These, again, are a lot like Tinderbox dictionaries, but again, semicolons in Tinderbox, commas in JSON. Art, go ahead. I think you're muted.
Oh, did you call me? Your audio might, or maybe my audio is bad. Sorry. I was going to ask you that. So as you said before, there were those three permitted, like null. So here, after name, for example, if I included the value null, it would be read as a JSON value, correct?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
You very seldom actually need that one. You might need true and false, and you can't use them for other things. Okay. Now, the reason we're talking about this today is I messed up. I tried to do the simplest thing that could possibly work and the original design, but it was too simple and it did not work. And here, the obvious thing to do was to implement Lisp as in Tinderbox and make Tinderbox actions into Lisp. This is elegant, it's fun, it's been done before. This paper is actually quite a good paper, and Stallman back in, what is it, 1981? Yes, hadn't become Stallman yet. So there's still lots of future. But I resisted this temptation and did less. First, because you probably aren't all that eager to learn Lisp, and it does feel like more engineering than this task wants. Remember, the Tinderbox action language was supposed to be really simple and really permissive. And Lisp, especially 20 years ago, Lisp was thought to be not simple. And Lisp, well, no one has ever said Lisp was permissive. Okay, the result is, as of today, the docs are just a mess. This is partly because they're documenting the behavior of the system that didn't work, and partly because they're obsolete. We'll catch up and fix them. The core problem, it turns out, is Tinderbox didn't handle nested objects properly because it wasn't Lisp. JSON uses lots of nested objects. JSON is all about nesting many, many levels deep, where I was able to say, really, I can see having a list as a dictionary value, but who is ever going to need a list in a dictionary? This doesn't feel like something you would need in your notes. It turns out it is something people need in their notes, and it comes up all the time. And so what seemed to be over engineering was just the necessary engineering. In the solution, Tinderbox now handles nested objects properly because Tinderbox actions now are Lisp. Oh well. So we have in the documentation 3 JSON operators. .json, which is what you want to know and what you want to use. Capture JSON, which we used to use but don't use anymore except for one very specific use, which has nothing to do with capturing, but we may need to rename it. And JSON value, which as far as I can see, no longer has any purpose at all. So for almost everything, .json is all you need. It is a stream operator. As you recall, the stream operators all start with a string and do something to the string and then return the string, which means that you can chain them together in a lovely functional pattern. So you can take a string and capitalize it and reverse the order, and it all fits together. Here, we consume the stream until we have parsed one JSON element, or we know that this isn't JSON. And as soon as either we have finished one JSON element or know that this is not validly JSON, we stop. Unlike all the other stream operators, .json returns an object that you can query, not the string. For example, if I feed the text of a note to JSON and then ask for the first element, it parses a list that is assumed to be at the start of the text and gets the first element. If I ask for the same thing, but I ask for Cicero, It parses an object and returns the value for the keyword Cicero. If I ask for the first, here I'm parsing a list, getting the first element, then taking that first element and getting its value for Cicero. We will see this later. This is actually something you'll do a lot of. Now, capture JSON is now almost like JSON with one little difference. It consumes the stream until it's parsed one JSON element or failed. It remembers the JSON object, which is now bound to the temporary variable JSON, and it returns the rest of the stream. Okay, it's just like JSON, except it returns the rest of the stream. This is useful if you need to use the rest of the stream for something else. Now, this is not great style, nor is it great style to have some text followed by some JSON. But if you need it, it's there. In particular, we're seeing JSON prefixes used in some tools for thought apps, the way YAML is sometimes used. We have some machine readable stuff at the beginning or end of the note, and then a delimiter, and then the note itself. So we're going to see these. I think that probably capture JSON is going to want to be renamed skip JSON at some point or other, but we'll see. Okay, I am about to launch into altogether too many simple examples to work through, but are there questions or comments that we want to get to before we dive into examples?
It's fascinating so far.
Okay. I'm doing everything here with rules and with text. I presume that you're going to be able to see the inspector?
Yep.
Okay, good. So we start here with the text, as you see, is a object which has two keys, frogs and logs, and logs is a list. So if I want to get the list, I just ask for JSON of logs. If I want to extract a particular number from that list, I can leap in. I can ask for JSON of logs and then ask for the element 1, which is the second element, remember. List indices begin with 0. Again, if I have simply two keywords, two keys, two values, I can get the value easily enough. Now, if I use capture JSON, remember capture JSON gives me what comes after the JSON and holds the JSON in its memory. So here afterwards, I can use JSON. Okay. List of dictionaries. Okay, this is a list of one dictionary. Okay, it's a list. It's enclosed in brackets. And it's just got one element. It might have another element. Now it's a list of two dictionaries, one of which is empty. And again, I can reach into the first element, and then I've got.
And Mark, what would be an example of why would one like do that? So what would be when you have two
Hold on
elements
to
of like
the
a
thought.
dictionary? It'd be like,
I've got
okay.
a useful example coming up.
Okay, perfect.
But the useful example actually makes use of this and what's coming. In fact, I'm going to jump all the way to the useful example. Here is an actual piece of JSON that the New York Times will give you if you ask it for you can send a query for certain reviews to this URL, and it will give you back a piece of JSON, which starts out by saying, did I succeed in finding you some reviews, or did I not understand what you were asking? Claims a copyright, tells you how many results it's found, and then gives you the results. And here, the results, the value of results is a list that contains an object for each result. And one of the things in this is this bundle of information with the URL of the review, its publication date, its byline, the book title, the book author, which is different from the byline, a summary of the review, and the ISBN. So fairly often, what you end up doing is sending a web application a request, a query, and it sends you back a list of things that fit your query. And that typically is wrapped up as a list of objects. This is an example of where we have some JSON, and then we've got some natural language and a delimiter, and then we've got some more JSON. And so the JSON that comes at the beginning, I can just pick off in the usual way. The JSON that comes later, I have to parse the first one, then skip to the delimiter, and then I can parse the rest. And finally, here actually printed rather more nicely. We've got an example of how nested things can be. If I want to ask Readwise to send me some or all of my Kindle highlights, it's going to say, okay, here come some results. And the results are a list. And here is one result in that list. And it's got a book ID, it's got an author, a title, and various things. And it's got highlights. And that highlight is, again, a list of objects. And a typical object has an ID and some text and a color, which might be yellow or blue. The ID of the book it's in, it may have a tag. It's got a way to get it back from Readwise. And so you have a bunch of these. So again, we have lists of objects which have lists of objects in them. So this can get nested fairly deeply. Now, this finally begs the question of if I have a complex JSON object, that's, say, a list, I could assign it to a Tinderbox list, and then I could find the element I want by looking at the a specific item in that list or iterating through the list, going one by one through each of the elements. Or I could use JSON to itself dive into the JSON structure and just extract the bit I want. Sometimes it's obvious what you want to do. If you've got a choice, it's probably faster and cleaner to ask JSON to do the navigation work and to select what you want to get, rather than to bring the whole thing into Tinderbox and then extract the thing you actually want inside Tinderbox. It's not a big deal, but I suspect that it will be significantly faster. So the key thing is use JSON. Remember that JSON value exists in case you need to parse something that's partly JSON and partly something else. And if you get stuck on something, use the forum. In this case, show what you're trying to parse in JSON and show what you want to extract and how you're trying to extract it. And we should be able in short order to figure out what's going astray. So that's what I've got on JSON. Michael, I think you're muted.
Yeah. I did have a question though. So like, I remember when I was trying to do the readwise input, and the readwise threw in some unexpected characters, which then froze up my Tinderbox file. Like, how does one work with that? Or what do you, or how do you deal with?
I think that's better now.
Okay.
I may be mistaken, but I think, again, Tinderbox, there are parts of Tinderbox that predate Unicode. And so Tinderbox does a lot of moving between Unicode in one representation and Unicode in another representation. It's unfortunate and it's not particularly efficient, but we're trying to do less of that. And in particular, all of the parser classes used the wrong kind of Unicode, and that was a mess. And I think your problem was a seam where one of those classes hit it, just was hitting something in a very unfortunate way.
Got it. And so I think and so for the community, I think there's a good learning from this too, is that in the experience that I had, one, the file wouldn't open in one context, and the other file it would open, but even though I knew there was notes there, nothing was being displayed. And rather than freaking out, knowing Mark, I was able just to send him the file and he was able to fix it. So I think that's one of the if you experience one of those really weird edgy case things, pause, take a breath, don't freak out, ask Mark for help, and then he'll help guide you in the right direction. And I think the other learning for me there would go ahead.
It's been an eon since we completely lost a file. So
Right.
that's pretty good.
I haven't lost a file for years. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say there too is also, just for one's own sake of sanity, if you also just regularly maintain backups, not necessarily because the application is going to do something screwy, but you might do something screwy. If you constantly have something like Arc backup running or one of the other cloud backup systems, not solely just rely on the internal time machine that Tinderbox uses for the Mac, that I've also found to be another really useful element. So between that and knowing that Mark's there and the community's there, you can be pretty safe with playing around with all this stuff. Fun. Anybody else have any comments, questions, thoughts on this? Mr. Paul, Christy.
I find this really very helpful because I'm more and more coming across sites that offer JSON JSON as a output format, and it seems to be more structured than CSV or some other things, and that I can pull it right into Tinderbox and start working with it. This is going to sound like an unformed question, but very often you'll see a square bracket that opens a series of JSON curly bracket sets. And what I find myself wanting to do is create a new note for each set within curly brackets. So how do I know when I've got a new JSON curly bracket record coming up?
Well, what you're describing is a list of objects, and
Yeah.
you want to make a note for each object. So the way I would do that is I would I'd get that list into a Tinderbox list attribute or a temporary, and then I would iterate through the list.each.
List.each, yeah.
And so now list.each x, and now x is bound in turn to each element of the list. And in your case, you might create a new note, give it a name, and make, say, it's text or some other attribute equal to x. So now you've isolated the elements of that list, and you've got a note for each element.
Yeah. I'll give that a try.
On that same vein, the other thing, as I said, in my world, the whole identity, personal data world is gravitating towards this kind of data interchange capabilities. And in particular, from a personal perspective for all of us, is part of the global movement towards giving people rights towards their data. So like California Consumer Privacy Protection Act, European GDPR, and a whole bunch of other legislative acts around the world give people rights to data rectification, data access, and more importantly, data portability, meaning we all have the right for data subject requests. So for example, if you live in California, you can go to any California company that has more than 50,000 customers and say, give me a copy of all of the data you have on me. And the smarter companies are starting to adopt a JSON-like format to give you that data. And so then you can get a record of your data in a JSON format, pull it into Tinderbox, and then analyze like what kind of data LinkedIn has on you or what kind of data Facebook has on you. Now, a lot of the times that data, the data is crap, but the companies that are getting more astute and aware of these kind of new and emerging regulatory frameworks are using JSON as a way of communicating that. So if you learn this, you'll be able to then getting closer and closer to your personal data as you pull it back from the companies.
But another useful thing is, okay, when Tinderbox makes a new note, it automatically timestamps it and associates it with your author string and so forth. But you may have a kind of a note where you actually want some other piece of data automatically associated. For example, in nicepharma.com, you want today's weather on the daily note. And so you can go out to your favorite weather information supplier and ask it for today's JSON, and parse out the temperature and the humidity and whatever else you want. That can be a big time saver. Tom.
Mm-hmm. First of all, Mark, thank you so much for the overview. I learned a ton here. My observation is that in learning my little experience with JSON and in learning JSON, it reminds me a lot of dictionaries in terms of how to handle the data. And I was just curious, how are they different than a dictionary, or how are they similar in terms of that? Because they both use a curly brackets, right? And they a lot of times they do have pairs, but yet it's a different object. So if you could explain that part of it, that would be great.
Yeah, JSON objects and Tinderbox dictionaries are pretty much the same thing. the obvious difference I mentioned, semicolons versus commas. And it again, the order of elements in a JSON object are arbitrary and not really subject to your control. And that's also true of Tinderbox dictionaries. So you can't necessarily assume anything about the sequence with which JSON is going to give you the keys. Keys often end up being alphabetical in both programs, but don't assume it. They're the same sort of thing. They're associative stores.
Thank you.
You know, another use case I just thought too, Mark, is a lot of the emerging personal AI models, or allow you to feed JSON into them to train the model. So, one thing I've been exploring this summer is using my Tinderbox files to send training data to my personal AI on all of the things that I'm writing. And so I could see this JSON formatting being a more efficient way of doing that.
Yes, and thanks for driving a good deal of this to Detlef Bayer, who, in exactly that scenario, really drove the final conviction that we couldn't limp along without proper handling of nested objects.
Nice.
Gavin.
Oh yeah, hello. So I'm very clunky as a kind of programmer. So this is kind of like or at least my programming skills are pretty kind of random and basic. So I use a program called Mochi, which is a much nicer version of Anki. So Anki being a program that's used as kind of flashcards for learning various kinds of languages. And like all of these things, your data tends to be kind of locked into the program. But Mochi does work in JSON and can export JSON and has APIs and all kinds of things. And so one of the things is that I would like to kind of play around with doing that might be just a world of pain, is it would be quite useful for me to have kind of long notes in Tinderbox, which are about certain words and their collocations and their usages. But Tinderbox isn't set up as a kind of flash note type program. So to do the memorization thing, obviously I need to use Mochi. And so I'm wondering whether there's some kind of way of sort of developing kind of interchange processes between the two programs, given that these could be quite a large number of objects. So it could be, 2,000, 3,000 different cards or notes. And I can see how it would work in my head in terms of kind of different sides. But I guess the two issues are, one, the question of importing so many things, so many objects from another program, and whether that's likely to be reliable. And then the reverse process as well of thinking about how one might go about porting a Tinderbox file or exporting from Tinderbox to Mochi via some either JSON text file or whatever the process might be. And what would go wrong? So before I try, what would be the complications in even thinking about doing that, or is it just not worth the time? I guess is the question.
Hey Gavin, real quick, Mochi. What can you spell that? What is that?
It's Mochi. It's MOCHI. Mochi.
Okay.
I think I'm trying to tell you what the URL is on the website. I can't remember. Something like Mochi. Mochi.cards. And it's actually very beautifully designed. It's much nicer than Anki in terms of using it.
Nice.
One architecture that might work for this, and another reason you might be wanting to use Tinderbox, is I can imagine using Mochi as a poster inside a Tinderbox document, where the Tinderbox document feeds it a card or a deck of cards or a supplement from time to time, and Mochi displays in its poster. Similarly, if you've got Mochi as a poster, it might, for example, give you your user statistics, your grade, so to speak, what you've been reviewing and how well you've been doing. And if you retrieve that, it's almost surely going to be retrieved as a hunk of JSON, which might be as simple as user date and score, or might be more complicated than that. But again, it's nice to be able to get out of JSON and into Tinderbox attributes for record keeping or dashboards or whatever else you need.
Mm. But what about the exporting idea of exporting from Tinderbox? Is this
That should be
template?
absolutely straightforward.
We set up a template effectively.
Yeah, you build a template, and you probably build two templates. One for the for example, if you're exporting a list of objects, you would have one template for the container, what we call the envelope, and another template that's applied to each of the objects inside the list. The one problem here is that sometimes you may encounter things in strings that you shouldn't have in JSON strings. And there is, in fact, a function JSON code that will escape things that can't be in JSON strings.
Okay.
There's not many of them, but for example, if you have I forget, I think you're not supposed to have square brackets or curly brackets unescaped inside JSON strings, and so you have to escape them. It's little edge cases like that JSON encode and JSON decode take care of.
So sorry, just pick up that I'd have to use some kind of regex function to
It's regex-like. It's simpler than that. You just encode and decode, depending on whether you're taking a string and sending it to JSON or taking it back. And unless you've got fairly esoteric, this is mostly of interest for cases where you're writing a programming book, and so you've got JSON examples that have to go inside JSON. So you've got JSON examples inside JSON examples inside JSON. This is unlikely to actually crop up in your real life, but if you find yourself someday doing something completely crazy, it's good to remember that these exist.
Great. No, thanks. That's really helpful.
So based on getting, anybody else have any other comments, questions? I just had an idea. I was thinking we've got about 45 minutes left. And if we wanted to, based on Gavin's comment of creating an export template in JSON format, if we'd like, we can share screen and build one. Would you be interested in that, Gavin? Or everyone else want to do a thumbs up or something like that, and we could
Yeah, I'm
model.
interested.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. So let's play with that. Nothing like real-time messing around. So I've got so I went to W3C schools and just grabbed a big example JSON format, which is interesting because they also show the difference between like an XML versus JSON format. And I dropped this in the chat. So I just grabbed that as an example to think about it. And so you've got a list of employees, and then you're going to create, and then we're going to generate this list. So let's go ahead And so I put this in as kind of a sample output structure of what we want. So let's experiment first thinking about that. So we've got John and Doe, Anna and Smith, and Peter and Jones. So let's go ahead and start with this, and we'll call this employees. Employees. And let's turn it to the map view because it might be easier. And then we're going to say, actually, let's go ahead and add in a prototype person. And then we're going to turn this into a, just to make it fun, we'll add in the on add. And we'll say on add prototype equals person. And if just while I'm doing this, this is a little hack that I've learned. If you put the pipe in front of the equal sign, what that does is if a note doesn't have a prototype already assigned to it, when you add a note to that container, it will add the prototype assignment. So it'll add, in this context, a person prototype to the note. If the note already has an assignment, like entity, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute, then it will not. And so if you are having, if you're moving notes around and between containers and you accidentally drag a note into another container that has an on and function, adding the pipe will help protect you from overwriting whatever original prototype assignment you had to your note. So that's a little bit of a side note. And let me just demonstrate that real quick. So let's say we had another note, and I'll just grab an existing prototype here. Let's call the event one just for fun. So I've got two different prototypes, and we'll call this one an event. And we'll assign the event note here and just show you this example. So now that I've got that prototype equals person, if I add a note here, did I spell it right? Prototype equals I see I spelled it wrong. Prototype. So if I add a person, a note to this, I get, what was it, John Doe as that person. So if I were to drag event in here, so if I drag, let me create a new note. So if I drag new note into this, because it doesn't have a prototype assigned to it, it's going to get, let me drag it in. It will, come on. It will get and adopt the new note prototype because it doesn't have a prototype assigned to it. But event already has one assigned to it, but because I'm using the pipe operator, when I drag it in, it will not get changed. Whereas if I didn't have the pipe operator, let's go ahead and change that. If I didn't have the pipe operator and I move event in, it gets changed. So that's a really, really little useful, what do you call that, Mark? Is that called an operator? When you're using pipe in that context? I don't know the language. You know, like Gavin, I don't have the programming chops to actually know what I'm talking about. What's the language one uses for that? Is it called an operator or a flag or something? All right. Anyway, let me go ahead here. So does that make sense, everyone, on that one? Just as give me a thumbs up or something. I can't really see anybody right now. Got it. Okay. So so now we've got John Doe. Let's create an Anna Smith. All right. Anna Smith. And we have a Peter Jones as our example. Oops. Okay. While we're at it too, which could be interesting, is in the existing person prototype, we don't actually have first name and last name as attributes. Those aren't system generated attributes. So in this demo, we're going to want to go ahead and create our own user generated attributes. First name and last name. Okay, and when you're creating attributes from this displayed attribute function, the attributes when they get created are automatically string attributes. Later, if you need to go change those, you can using the inspector, and it pops up and it will automatically default as being a string, but you can select your other attributes if you want. In this case, we want them to be string attributes. So let's say we'll go up and populate this. So now we've got our first name, last name functions there. The one other step that we might want to do prior to working on our template is we need to parse this name, John Doe, and get it into the first name, last name. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And if there are middle names and if there are multiple middle names, there's different ways you can go about doing that. But since we have a really easy example right now, let me go and show you one operator function you can do. So let's go parse name. And then I'll say variable list equals vlist. And we're going to say name dot split. And we want to split at the space. So essentially what I'm telling Tinderbox as an operator is I'm saying create a variable that's a list, grab the name and split the list at the space in between the two names. And then that's going to generate a list for me. And then I can say, make the first name equal to the vlist dot at 0. So what I'm saying is, hey, Tinderbox, in that list we just generated, grab the first item in the list, which is at the 0 point, because the lists go from 0 to 9, and then make the last name equal to the vlist dot at 1. And so if I now apply that to John Doe, I get my first name, last names automatically populated. And if you had a longer patterns name, a name that has like middle names and things like that, you would apply a more you would apply a different pattern matching. You use a regex, or you might use a different operator other than split. But for the sake of this example, since we've got a simple pattern, I can now just apply that. And you'll see we now have been able to automatically parse our names and have that time savings. So hopefully that's of interest to everyone. And now let's go ahead and play with and build our template. So we're going to go in and add a simple template. And we're going to create a JSON template. And so we'll start by creating our JSON template. And let's look at our example. And the example is, and we can just grab our output that we want. And again, I'm making this up on the fly, so we'll see if it works. So the initial example we want is this. And what we want is we want this employee's value to be automatically populated. We could have hard coded if we wanted, but let's go ahead and play with creating a value out of that. So if we add in the action code operator in our template, we'll go ahead and say N. All right, so that blocks out the action code. And what this export code in a template lets you do is write action code in a template context. So now what I'm going to say is I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to make a string, and I'm going to call it v type, or variable type, and I'm going to say v type equals name dot lowercase. So essentially what I'm telling Tinderbox, basically grab the note of the name that I'm currently selected and make that name lowercase. And then in my template, I'm going to ask Tinderbox to import the v type value. So now when Tinderbox, So now when Tinderbox, when this template's going to export, when I'm selecting employees and I go to render this template, it's going to first create the JSON structure that I want. and then it will render the name of the note using lowercase. So that way I'm going to get the name employees. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this because I don't want to have to retype it. I'm going to tell Tinderbox what I want you to do. Once you've processed me, the parent of the note, I want you then to process the children of this note. And the way you go about doing that is you say children templates, and we'll call this one TJSON. And then this is going to be TJSON items. Okay. And then we're going to create a new template called TJSON items. So now what this does is, so essentially what this is saying is render the JSON file, label it, and then process each of the children individually using this template TJSON items. So now we go back to our sample file, and this is what a TJSON item is going to look like. And we're probably going to do some kind of, so essentially what we want to get is first name and last name values. And so we can pull this here and do essentially the same thing. And this will be first name. We don't need the V, I guess, in this context. And that is going to be first name attribute. And then if we copy that and get another string, and this is going to be our last name attribute. Okay, so I've got my two strings, and if I go and then put in the value operator, value equals first name. Actually, I like the V's. It always reminds me that this is actually a variable. Okay, and then this one is going to be value last name. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so let's see what we get. So if I now go up to employees and I apply this template there, and then I go and render it. So let's turn on the show paid view selector. So I get my view selectors. If I hit preview, I get nothing. But if I look at the export, I'm actually going to get my JSON output. And then all I need to do is copy that, paste it somewhere, or export it, or do whatever I need to do with it. That makes sense. Anybody? And then you'll notice, now let's play with it a little bit. I don't know if Mark, if this makes any sense, but you notice that this item actually has an extra comma to it, and our sample file does not. And so I'm presumably that's important because you want to help the JSON know that there isn't an item following after it. So before I move on to address that, and because we've got time to do it, we can put in an if operator to have Tinderbox recognize is if this is the last item in the list, then don't put in that comma. But before we move into that, let's pause and see if anybody has any comments. Gavin, since this was your request, is this, are you following with me? Is this helpful? Any other comments, questions that we might have?
No, it is helpful. Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's obviously the thing I'm dealing with is kind of like a multiply kind of complicated thing, given that what the program does with JSON. But this is a very useful starting point just to think about how, just to see proof of concept and get a sense of how it all works. Yeah, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Right, and the whole key point is you can make this as complex as you want, and nest it and embed it as complex as you want, and you can also bring, and if we wanted to get more complex, we can demonstrate how you can actually bring values in from other notes too, not just the children. But that's, that gets more complex, and it would be useful for data. I see Paul Christie's hands up.
There's one
Yeah.
thing, so if I just follow up on that, is that the Mochi example. Sorry, Paul. is the issue of whether I can just pull an entire Mochi deck into Tinderbox, and then, I mean, you have to experiment with it to see what happens, and then modify it within Tinderbox, and then export it out, and then hopefully I haven't changed it in a way that it'll still function in the other application. That would be a thing to explore.
Yeah, and the way I would do that, again, it depends on how you do it. If you export Machi out as a CSV or as a JSON, if you export as a CSV, it comes in automatically. Every attribute, assuming the names are correct, would automatically get populated. Then you could re-export out using your Machi JSON template, or however you wanted that data out. I mean, we could explore that too in just a minute if you want. It really depends on how you get, what the format of the data is coming out of Machi and what the format Machi needs coming in. And that's something else we can explore if you want. But let's, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Like,
Thank
have you used like CSV import for Tinderbox, or and maybe
I
you
have,
got
yeah,
a
not with
JSON or
Mochi
CSV
decks.
export example? We can,
Yeah, no,
yeah. If you
I've
want
done
to
that with
if
other
you've got a
things.
sample file you want to upload to the chat, we can play with it.
Yeah, hang on a second, I'll have to just do.
Yeah. While you're doing that, let's have Paul ask his question, Mr. Paul.
Yeah, I thought what would be interesting to watch is you have a sample file that's in JSON format, but then you created notes on the fly. Would it be that much harder just to read the JSON file into notes and then export them? See
I'm
what I
sorry,
mean?
you're talking to Gavin or me?
No, I'm talking to
No.
you, Michael. I mean, you're
Yeah.
your sample file is JSON. If you click on that,
Yeah, I mean, I could have parsed this. So I haven't gone through the exercise of parsing this. So I could have done the parsing that Mark just did,
yeah,
but that wasn't the
okay.
assignment for this particular exercise. The assignment for this exercise is to create an XSplit. So the alternative thing we could do, and we've got a half an hour, we could play with it. We could do what Mark was just teaching us in the beginning, which I've never done before, so we'll stumble around a little bit. But we could also take this, parse it to create these notes. So that would be a fun exercise to try too, once we're done with this export example.
Gotcha.
And actually learn what, and kind of experiment with what Mark Bernstein was just teaching us.
Yep.
Okay. Let's do, while we're finishing this up, let's do this one example here where we can address this comma. And I think that would be useful. Might we go about doing that? So the other way I would go about doing that. So in this context, we were hard coding the string that we want here. I'm going to experiment with this idea real quick. So I'm going to save this one as our original. We'll call this one. And then we'll focus on here. So rather than doing it this way, I'm going to now do a kind of an if statement. So we've got a list. So I'm going to do this now. I'm going to say variable list equals vlist. Oh, hang on. I want to do this too. Let's do it this way. This is our JSON original template. And now let's create this one, JSON1 and 1. All right. So we're going to modify what we were doing here. And so in this template, it's going to be a little bit different. And so in this context, what we're going to say is, now we're going to do this variable list equals vlist. And our list is the collect. Sorry, my C key is breaking on my computer. Children. And I'm just going to grab the ID. All right. And so so essentially what we're telling the template to do is generate a list for me when you're analyzing these children. And then what we're going to say is vlist dot each x. All right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to operate against that list And so what we're going to be asking Tinderbox is for each item in the list, perform this operation against it. And so what we're going to need for that to happen is we're going to need another variable. And we're going to call this variable a string. And we'll create a v string. And it is going to initially equal nothing. And so what we're going to say is, so what is that string going to be? So the first step of the string is we're going to basically needing to be recreating string equals, and let's just do this for now. And let's ultimately, I'm going to keep that pattern down for now, but ultimately we're also going to want to output. I find it sometimes helpful to kind of put in the things that I know where they're going to go as I think about it. So ultimately we're going to be importing the value of v string into our note. And what we're trying to have Tinderbox do with its action code, and we're just going to paste this now so we can remodel it. We're going to have Tinderbox initially to create this for us. So the first thing it needs to do, and when you have quotes and quotes like this, you use single quotes. So the first part of the string that we want Tinderbox to generate for us is this is the first name parameter within the string. And then we're going to have Tinderbox create another string. And then if we want to, we'll have Tinderbox create another string. You say plus equals. So we wanted to be incrementally building this string that we want. So then we're going to say, give me the first name of X. And so and remember, so we've asked Tinderbox, create a list and get me the ID numbers of the list. And now in this each list operator, we're saying, start generating the list for me and pass me the list for the ID number of the first item in the list. And so get me the first name of the note that is this ID number. And then that's going to be the next. And then the next thing we're going to ask Tinderbox to do is pass the string. Come on. My mouse isn't working. There we go. We're going to ask Tinderbox to pass me this string. Actually, I can just copy this. And this is now going to be last name. All right. So Tinderbox, now once you populated last name, then give me this. Make it equal to v last name, sorry. And this is going to be equal to v. Sorry for all the typos here. First name. All right. And then we're and say we need to get this. And then now that we've got the first name value, we need to get this last little bit. And then we're going to, I'll show you the magic that will happen after this. All right. So plus equals that. All right. So that is the complete string we want. So essentially, if we apply this template, what we're saying is, hey, Tinderbox, go create, and then what we want it to do is one more thing at the end is give me a line break, right? So for each, what we want you to do is grab me the list, process that list, create a string, and populate that string with that struct to it. So if we go up here and apply this template, and we're not solving the initial problem I was just suggesting, we're going to grab our new template. And if we look at that one, we don't get the airport, we start to get the export, but let's see what I did wrong. So I probably got something broken here. So JSON 1, JSON items, items 1. Okay, so now if we go back and do it, okay, you see we're getting a lot more space in there. So it's definitely doing something, but I must have a typo in the template. So let's see. Give me the, so for each X, give me the first name of that item. So that closes that out. Then give me the first name. Then give me the last name. Last name. It should have worked.
Michael,
What's going on?
name of your attribute be last name, or is it just last name?
It should be the name of the attribute is, oh shit. You're right. Last name, because I was using the variables before. This is the actual attribute names. So give me the attribute names for this. So that should work, but that should still have populated those. Let's see. All right, let's see what we get. Okay, it's still not processing the children properly for some reason. So let's see what's going on. So we're getting the value of the name, process the children, simple tjson1, tjson items 1. So, and then what's going on with the children?
You got 2 spaces. Does that make a difference?
Oh, no. Look right here. Look right here. I'm zeroing out. I didn't do a plus here. And we might as well do plus here. So it was doing that, and then it was failing there. Let's see what that does. Okay, still not getting it. So when in doubt, let's just do this really quick just to make sure we're getting something. B string equals hello world. So if I do that, my output should be hello world. All right, so I'm getting the hello world for each of the different items. So at least I know that is. So it's breaking in here somewhere. The action. Sorry, someone was saying something. I ignored you.
It was only there were 2 spaces in one of the. Yeah, it probably doesn't matter. It probably just
Where?
It's them.
Probably doesn't
it was
matter, but
yeah. It must have. I think it was in tjson1.
where is that?
In the other file you were looking at.
In the other template.
Yeah,
but
the other template.
you know it's working because the hello world worked. What I would do at this point is I comment out. In your loop, I'd comment out all bar the first thing. The first thing is going to insert a string, so you can do the same text as your hello world, and you can and then you can loop through and just I mean, it's a fairly rough way of doing it, but you can uncomment them, and eventually it will break.
Sorry, Michael, on the second.
So this should.
The one you're on. Sorry to cut in on the line
Yeah.
above the one you're on. There's only one double quote. Does that actually mean something?
Where?
The line you're on now,
Where?
the line above it. Yeah, there, that line. See, there's a.
No, that's
after the
fine
string-
because I'm closing the quote up here.
Okay.
That's fine, and this should
Okay,
close.
okay.
So let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it one at a time. See what we get. So it's not even working on the very first one is the problem. So let's see what's wrong. What's going on, Mr. Anderson? What am I doing wrong here? Collect. Okay, so one way to do this right now is you could.
You might write
let's
out
just
what
see.
vlist is.
That's what I was just about to do. I was going to say v string equals vlist. So let's just see if we're getting the list at all. Right. So the issue is that we're breaking at vlist. So vlist equals as children ID. So for some reason, what's wrong? Variable list vlist equals collect.
You want the. So where is children ID? What note is current when you call that collect?
Employees.
Okay, right. So that should So it
So
should give
this. It should give me. So if that's current. Okay, so now we're getting something, but it's not giving me.
Well, hold on a second. Right, look at your template is TJSON items 1, but the template for employees is, so just go to the template above. No, it's the TJSON 1, which is the one that's actually set for employees. If you select that template. Yeah, that one. Okay, so now you're telling it's children. So TJSON item 1 is actually trying to collect the children of each of the children, because it's, if you think about it.
Oh, you're right. 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 You're right.
So
You're
you
right. So
actually
what we can
wanted to create
do,
that.
we actually want to do this up here.
Just do it all. Just do it all in the first thing.
Yeah,
because,
yeah. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. So if we do this, I was being silly. Yeah, so funny. Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right, so we collect the list. So we only need, in this context, we only need the one template. We don't need the children. And we're outputting the string. So we're basically saying, make the name. Oh,
you want the outer part of the JSON.
Yeah, we want the out. We want that part. I don't need this now. And this is going to be
B string.
B string. This is what you get for doing this stuff real time. All right. So what we're now saying is make the name lowercase, collect the children, make the var string. I don't need this anymore. And now this should work just fine. That's funny. Okay, so now if we do that, there you go. And we're getting it twice because I probably have something going on in here. I've got the v value stream there twice. Okay. There you go. So that's how you would do it in one template. And then now let's go back to the original problem that we were trying to solve.
Just one thing to be aware of is not all JSON parsers will cope with that, because you've got a comma at the end of a list.
Well, no, that's the problem we're now going to solve. So I was doing one step at a time. Now I've got the original output. So let's now solve the original problem. So what you want to do is you say if x dot first, is that right? X dot here, if x dot last equals true. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to put a conditional into the code. So you're saying if, I'll double check if this is right.
Basically, you want the conditional.
Mark Anderson, catch me if it's wrong.
You want the conditional to go around the penultimate line. The one that says v string encloses has the curly bracket and the comma. So if it's v last, it's a curly bracket, no comma, and all the other ones it's a curly bracket with a comma. So you just want that one line to be the conditional.
Right. So if we do that, and we do that, and then it's like that. So what we're now saying is we're saying, all right, in the list, if you're the last item in the list, do all of that, but don't put the comma. If otherwise, everyone else gets the comma. So now if we do that, we generate the list, and what was wrong with that? I think I've got my last, is it dot last equals true? Or is it just dot last? What's the, I haven't looked up ATP ref.
I don't think
Mark?
we have a last predicate.
I know this has been
I thought we did.
a problematic thing to do for a long time. Yeah, because
I can't remember.
It's a question to ask, but hard to work out.
But we can check whether we have a next sibling.
No, we do have a last. I do the last all the time. I just have to look up into my other file. Can we look it up in ATB ref real quick, or I can pause my screen and
I'm just
look
taking
it up in another file. I've used it before. I just can't remember, and that's why I can look at it. And let me stop sharing screen, and I'll look at one of my other files. Because I just
Possible,
do
as
it.
Mark was
It's
saying,
probably
might
in
be
this one.
referring to something within JSON.
But
There is a
if I could make a suggestion here, it's actually
Yeah.
hard to know if you are on the last item, but it's easy to know if you're on the first item because you've either
Right. So
done
we should
this
be doing
before
dot
or
first.
not. So if you
Okay.
set up a Boolean variable before the loop that like is called is first and it's true, then you can test whether it's the first time through.
Yeah. I know. Here I got it. Just a minute. I'm just looking at my code here.
Yeah, so you can also get the
Oh, I
first
know. I
element and
see
the
what I
last
said. No,
element
I
and
see what I did
for
wrong.
equality with X.
Yeah, I think this is it.
Of course,
I see what I did wrong.
yeah.
Let me go to my untitled file. I see what I did wrong. Just a minute. It's not this. This is the wrong syntax. I'll share it again. It is this. What I'm saying is if ID equals .x .last, that's what I did wrong. So if ID of here it is. If X equals vlist .last. If X is the last item in the list, then do that. That should work.
Yeah.
There you go. So you'll notice that since this one was the last item in the list, the comment is now gone. And if we were to move Peter up, you'll now see that Anna is going to be the last item in the list. And so that Anna now doesn't have the semicolon. So that's how you do it. I just forgot how to do it. So we're saying basically if X equals vlist.last, give me this, otherwise else make it this. And that's how you can like make the last end. And that works really useful for like when you're wanting to put a period at the end of a sentence, or when you're wanting to, manipulate how that output's working. So that's a nice little syntax for us.
Yeah, another approach
right.
you can use with more verbose is to make take the size of the list
Boolean.
and make a counter and just check.
Yes.
If you're expecting 5 items, you just say, depending on whether you're using a 0 or 1 base number, if you start at 1 and you've got 5 items, say if I'm number 5. And the thing is, if you put your conditional just around the line that changes rather than the whole thing, it just makes it a bit easier. Because the only thing
So
that's
let's try
changed,
that. So v number equals count.
list count, list.count. So that's the number of things you're expecting.
All right.
And you could have your
yeah,
counter.
I'm going to need with my C key breaking, I think I have to go buy a new MacBook M4 just because of that.
Ooh.
All right.
It broke just the right time.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got a count number here. And so now what we're going to say, and so now we can conditional this. We don't need that there. And we can put the conditional around this part. We can say,
correct.
If the count, and we'll figure out what that should be in just a second. And then what you're going to want to tend to do, I think you wanted to make the count plus equals 1.
But you want to put an end.
And so we've got our
You've got too much stuff in
Right,
there.
so we're going
You've
to
got your
increment this.
closure.
I
You've
do.
got your line with the line break should be outside the if.
Yeah.
The only line
Yeah,
you're
that
changing
should be,
is the line
that's
with
right.
the comma.
Yeah, that's right.
So all do your unconditional stuff
right.
with that line and anything else that you got to do. If you're
Right.
going to do the counter
And then
that
we
way,
need an else in here.
yes, and the counter goes outside the conditional because the counter goes. You want the counter to run each time.
Right.
If you want to start by setting the counter to the size of the list, then you want to decrement it. So basically, if it's 5,
Right.
you want to take 1 off each time and check if you got to 0 or 1.
Right. That's right. Equals
I mean,
minus 1. Okay, so our counter is 3 in this context. And we're saying if the counter is greater than or equal to 0, then you include the comma. Else, when it becomes 0, it will get that. And then every time it loops through, it's gonna increment minusing 1.
No, because
That
if
should
you've
work.
got 3 items, on the third thing, it'll be 1. So if you set to vlist count -1, just go to the top of it where
-1.
No, just at the end of that line. No, where you were at the end of that line, v number v count equals vlist dot count -1. So you've got a 3-item list and it's 2. Now your code will count down and it'll be 0 on the last of the loop. This is the whole craziness of 0 and 1 based stuff, but that's there for the long haul, and it doesn't matter which way you do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now if we apply our v2, we now get the same output. There you go. It'll work great. So that's the other way to do it without having to, using a counter function as opposed to the .last function. And again, this is just one example of how to use .last or .counters. There's now that you understand the counting conditional, you find other uses for this and other use cases and other examples. Off the top of my head, I can't remember I've probably used it in 15 different ways. I just can't remember right now off the top of my head. All right, and then maybe since we're running out of time, maybe next week we can actually do what Mark just taught us how to do and parse this into actual notes. Or if somebody wants to experiment with that this week and come to us next week with that JSON parsing code, they can kick off next week's session with doing that for us. Yeah, Mr. Anderson.
Very quick, and I apologize. I got screwed by the time change. I apologize, I'm late. Did we cover anything on parse JSON and JSON value? I basically ATVRF is good to go for 10.0.2, except those 2 bits which I haven't finished writing because they've changed.
We did.
Okay.
We did. So Mark walked through the whole new parsing stuff. So you can watch the video later.
Yeah. It'll be tomorrow. So hopefully I'll have the ATVRF update for tomorrow. Okay. We've got about 2 minutes left in our typically scheduled programming. Anybody else want to cover anything else, or was this helpful, useful?
Yeah, hey, I found it super useful. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Gavin.
Yeah, I was going to say I sent through 2 Mochi files. One contains pictures and it's big, and the other one doesn't.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's look at those right now, just so we can spend a couple extra since you did it. Let's grab them. I forgot about that part.
They are
thanks,
unfortunately
Steph. I wasn't looking at
minified,
the.
so
Can we get access to them?
first task is going to be to either get the spec, which I have a link to upstream, or find a decent JSON pretty printer, which should not be too hard.
All right, so let's look at I'll just share my screen so we can see what was sent through. And maybe this becomes an exercise we play with next week. So I opened up what you sent, and this is what comes out. So when you say it's minified, what does that mean, Mr. Bernstein?
We've taken out all the spaces and carriage returns so as to save the save bandwidth and therefore save the supplier money but this is not pleasant
Right.
for humans to read.
Got it. And so you're suggesting the first step might be run this through something to actually make it
a
human readable?
program that restores the white space in some disciplined, sensible way is conventionally known as a pretty printer. Now, these are often wrapped up with programs that look for possible errors, or warn you of things that are error adjacent, which for reasons of tradition are called linters.
So yeah, I tried to actually.
So maybe that's what we do for next.
JSON. I pasted that in your JSON validator, and it looked prettier. I don't know how far it sorted the linting issues out, but it did make it look nicer.
Right.
Okay, so given that we're out of time today, maybe that's what an exercise we can go through next week is making this prettier and then parsing it out. That would be a fun exercise for next week.
Can I put just one quick thing on the Jotter, and that is because I think one of the things that's been confusing, I know there's been some discussion on the backstage, is I think part of the confusion is arising from two disconnected sets of starting assumptions that aren't being fully surfaced. One is that what I'm trying to find is the JSON, but what is it? So for instance, if I take something like out of one of the tutorial PDFs where I've got an article with lots of JSON samples, I want to maybe find the fifth one, or I want to go through and I want to work on every one, which is actually a totally different use case from I'm expecting JSON. There might be some other stuff in it, which is similar, but actually subtly different. And I think that's what's been tripping things up. It's taken me a few days to get there, but I think that's the reason.
So I think that's it for this week.
Yeah, I think so. And if anybody else has any other comments, post them in the forum, and let's pick this up next week and kind of do the other half of the equation.
Thank you.
Super fun, all. That was great.
Thanks so much.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.